You're on mute, John.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is John Omoti, and I'm part of Like Minds Group and hosting this webinar today. We are privileged to have some very like-minded and very reputable company coming to do some justice and to talk about artificial intelligence as it relates into AML, KYC, onboarding, and compliance related matters. We have three very prominent persons from Actimize. I would allow them to introduce themselves in a sec. Just want to point out that they are quite a very good company. I was talking to Mike Helero, my first contact with Actimize. So when I got an email invite for us to have lunch in the Shard sometime late last year, and we had a fruitful discussion as we're looking at how we could optimize our solutions and the challenges we face as regards trade finance solutions and looking at KYC related issues. So it was on the basis of that I said, let's have these guys come and do another session for Like Minds. And I think that will be good. So we thanks for coming in. Thanks Adam, Mike, and also to Muken. Just for the point of everybody's knowledge, one of the speaker, I think he's not going to be around. So I think he had a family emergency. So we have one of his colleagues, Muken, will be doing the presentation on his behalf. So on this note, I would want to hand over to our colleagues and also friends from Actimize to introduce themselves and also to coordinate the session. But once you log on, just a point of note, please ensure you keep your mic muted all the time. Feel free to use the chat box. It's going to be an interactive session, and whereby you can have a lot of questions back and forth as regards automation on AI technology. So feel free to use the chat box at any particular point in time, and we'll take your questions and we'll go from there. All right. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to the team from Actimize.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you everyone for having us. I'll start and I'll introduce myself, and I'll let Mike and Muken introduce themselves, and then we will get started and show you what we had to present to you today. So good evening, everyone. My name's Adam McLaughlin. I'm the EMEA head for financial crime solutions at Actimize. I'm an operations guy by background, so I've been with Actimize for just over a year now. Pre-Actimize, I was in industry, so I worked for JP Morgan for 3.5 years. Within a financial crime space, I was managing operations teams within AML. And before that, I was a police officer for 10 years. And most of that time, I was a detective. And for half the time, I worked for the City of London Police, managing investigation teams looking at money laundering, fraud, and organised crime groups. So that's myself. Mike, did you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. My name is Michael Nine. As John said, I had the pleasure of meeting him about 6 months ago at an event that we hosted at the Shard. So I was extremely honored when he asked me if we could attend this session with Like Minds. He's been telling me about you as a group for quite some time now, and I've had the pleasure of joining a couple of your previous sessions just to get a sense of the type of audience that you are, which is not so much an audience as an interactive group of people who very earnestly and intelligently discuss the issues at hand. So I want to encourage you to do that today. We're really looking forward to presenting to you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, this is Muken Ladva. I've been working for Actimize now for the last 5 years. I'm essentially work within the solutions consultancy side of the business. So I've been working with many of the European banks around for the last 5 years inside Europe, and been consulting with some Middle Eastern banks and also in South Africa. So I have a wide experience when it comes to AML solutions and obviously Actimize solutions as well.
Thank you. So let me bring the presentation up. But what we want to talk to you today about is the future of the financial criminal. And before we do that, let me share my screen so you can actually see what I'm talking about. There. So, like I said, today we're going to talk about the future of the financial criminal, and we're going to look at how new technology can help fight the criminals. I think before we move on and talk about the future, I think maybe we should talk about the present and look at where we are today. And I think that will help to identify where we need to go to in the future. So today, financial crime is huge, quite simply. So if we're going to give some numbers around that, it's estimated that illicit movements of wealth around the globe is equivalent to about 3 to 5% of global GDP annually. What is that in numbers? Well, if you look at that in financial numbers, we're looking at around 1 to 3 trillion US dollars is laundered around the globe every year. Every single year, financial institutions ultimately identify about 1% of illicit wealth. So of this 1 to 3 trillion that's laundered, only about 1% is identified. Even less is law enforcement is able to seize even less than that. So seizures are around about 0.5%. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But what we're basically saying is criminals are getting away with about 99% of their illicit wealth that they're moving around the globe. So clearly something needs to change. And if I give you some stats as well around SAR filings. So I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with this, but financial institutions have a duty to monitor suspicious activity. They have a duty to understand their customers, understand what the customers are doing, and ultimately, if there's anything suspicious going on with their customers, they have to file what we call a suspicious activity report to the government agencies, which is the Financial Intelligence Unit. UK-wise, in terms of laundering, the National Crime Agency, which is the government law enforcement body, estimates that about 100 billion GDP is laundered every year through the UK alone. In 2018-2019, the UK law enforcement seized about 217 million GDP, which is peanuts, quite simply, compared to the 100 billion that is laundered. In terms of SAR filings, every single year SAR filings are going up and up and up. So in 2017-2018, there was just over 463,000 SARs filed to UK law enforcement by the regulated sector. That resulted in 28 criminal investigations and 40 arrests. Which, you know, the numbers don't really stack up. So 463,000 SARs filed with 40 arrests and 28 cases. So the conversions are really quite small. This year, so 2019 into 2020, there was 573,000 SARs filed to the NCA. So that's over 100,000 up on 2 years ago. So SAR numbers are going up. Investigations coming out of SARs is fairly small. And part of the problem for that is because the banks aren't able to join the dots. They're not able to see the bigger picture. They're not able, a lot of the data they get out of the systems is noise. So there's a lot of false positives that come out of the systems. Investigators investigate it, but ultimately the quality of the SARs aren't always great. So law enforcement have a very limited scope to work with. And so ultimately, financial institutions and the regulated sector as a whole need to get better at detecting suspicious activity, investigating suspicious activity, and reporting suspicious activity to law enforcement with the right details that law enforcement can act on. I think humans alone can't do that. I think they need to use technology to help them. And I think this is where AI, machine learning, and other advanced technologies can come in to start spotting what is normal and not normal. And this graph here, what I've got up here is showing actually the current system at the moment, part of the reason why it's broken is because there's a significant amount of siloing that happens. So my criminal there, the great drawing up there of the criminal, but the criminal knows this. So what the criminal will do is they will, even within an individual organization, a lot of them, especially the big organizations, onboarding might be different across different lines of business. So you might have a retail part of the business who onboard a customer. That same customer could join the investment part of the business and might get onboarded through a different process. And there's a different system that onboards that customer. And then again, they might join the asset management part of the business. Again, there might be a different onboarding system, a different KYC system with a different KYC team, and so on and so forth. Additionally, some of these monitorings around what the customer's doing and some of the transaction monitoring might also be siloed. So ultimately, what's happening within organizations, and this is especially what I've seen when I've been in industry, is they don't talk to each other. So you have these buckets of different lines of business all acting independently without sharing their data across the bigger organization. And especially if you've got a multi-global organization as well, it gets significantly worse. So you've got a global bank, for example, that operates in multiple jurisdictions around the world. For various reasons, some of them are legitimate around data sharing, some of them aren't so legitimate, but ultimately the banks don't share that data across the whole organization. So the criminals use this to their advantage, and they will start putting themselves into different parts of the business, maybe use fake names, maybe use fake IDs, maybe use mules, so might use somebody on their behalf to open up accounts. But ultimately, this one criminal can operate almost with impedance across the organization, across different streams, which creates a problem because ultimately, because we can't join the dots up, what should be suspicious and what should be quite obvious that it's suspicious isn't getting picked up. And so therefore, we're not filing the right start to law enforcement. So something needs to change. And I think this is, like I said before, where technology will come into the fold. And this is a slight off topic, but part of the issue we've got is technology is constantly moving forward. Technology is always moving. The banks and financial institutions are trying to use it to fight criminals, things like AI, machine learning, encryption. The criminals are also trying to stay ahead of the game as well, and some would argue that they're probably ahead of the banks in that, because one thing that does happen is we've got something called law. Sometimes it gets in the way of fighting financial crime. And one of the laws in particular in the European Union is GDPR, so data protection rules. And some of these rules have caused problems in terms of information sharing. So banks can't share information across different borders and different jurisdictions. So if they've got something suspicious, it's not easy just to call up the bank in France or call the bank in Spain or call the bank in, Turkey, for example, and say, oh, by the way, we've got this transaction and this is suspicion and let's all work together to fight it. You can't do that in an easy way. The criminals don't have that problem. The criminals form networks across jurisdictional borders globally, and they can utilize that network to perform their operations, whether that's moving people, so human trafficking, whether that's moving drugs, whether that's moving weapons, and actually moving back the other way, moving cash. So they all work together to move their wealth and also to perform their operations and to keep going with their business. And I think, I'm not sure if anyone's seen this, but this is huge news in the last week. So a system called Chat. And those of you not aware of this, this was the biggest police operation across Europe ever. And it's the biggest takedown of Mr. and Mrs. Biggs, as we call it, so the top echelons of the financial crime groups. This is the biggest takedown of them, I believe, in history in Europe. And what happened? So these criminals were using a phone called, it was a company called EncroChat. What this company did, it sounds like, from what I've seen, it was a company that was for criminals, operated by criminals. And quite simply, they took phones, normal phones, so Android operating systems generally. They would strip the cameras off them, take the microphones off them, and take GPS tracking off them, so disable that. And they would install an encrypted software called EncroChat. It was believed there's about 60,000 users around the globe. Why you would want to use it if you're not doing criminal networking, I'm not sure, but ultimately the whole point of this was you can hide what you're doing. So if you wanted to speak to somebody else using EncroChat, the other person had to have an EncroChat phone and EncroChat device as well. These devices weren't cheap. I think it was about £1,500 to £2,000 to buy the phone itself. You couldn't walk into a shop and you couldn't go online to buy these phones. You had to know somebody who was part of the supply chain, and you'd meet round a back door in an alleyway, and the exchange would take place. A bit like a drug deal, but the exchange would take place where you would hand over the cash and you would receive a handset. The handsets had two modes. One mode was an operating system to full law enforcement, so it just looked like a normal phone. The other mode, you push a selection of the power button, I think the volume button, would go into the encrypted mode, which was the EncroChat mode. And this allowed you to chat with other criminals who also had an EncroChat device. The messages would get deleted after a minute or two, so there was no evidence on the phone. You could remotely wipe the phone if law enforcement got hold of it. That's even if they could get into the EncroChat operating system. So it was very secure, and it's actually dubbed by EncroChat themselves to be the world's most secure handset. Unfortunately, for the criminals, that is, law enforcement hacked it. They managed to place malware onto the phone, and they monitored communications between criminals. And because the criminals thought it was encrypted, they were very, very open with what they're doing. So they were talking about murders, they were talking about kidnaps, they were talking about drug deals to intricate detail. They're talking about prices of deals. They talked about shipping routes. They talked about how they're laundering their money. They gave so much detail away, and the law enforcement took this information. And one thing to add is the contracts for these phones are £3,000 a year, so not cheap. And as a result of the information that the police got over the last 3 months, they've managed to arrest thousands of Mr. and Miss Bigs around Europe, seized tens of thousands in cash, several tons of drugs, hundreds of firearms, and they've stopped several murders from taking place. And this is where I think the reason why I sort of put this in is because I thought it's very relevant, because it shows that actually people are using technology today, and they're trying to use various techniques using technology to try and evade police and law enforcement, and law enforcement are trying to counter that. So I think this is a very good current example of this. Like I said, it's not the end. There's lots of investigations ongoing where they're still gathering evidence. So the criminals have all gone to ground at the moment. So I think drug prices are going through the roof at the moment because of that. But I think this is a really interesting point that nothing stands still, and the criminals are now going to have to find new ways to launder, new shipping routes, and new ways to communicate. So watch this space. I think this will change the criminal landscape over the next few months. Muken.
Yeah. Okay, so that leads me on to what the criminals can actually use and what they have available to use. So boundless data is something that they can have. They have access, if they have access to streams of data, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. Add to that limitless analytics and intelligent automation, and then you have criminals, for example, who can affect presidential elections. If you remember when a certain group of, let's call them criminals, had access to Facebook data, they were able to actually use that analytics, identify individuals who thought would take a particular message, and use automation to actually fire messages to them so as to, let's say, convert their thought process into voting in a particular way. That's one way. I mean, there's other different areas as well. If you think about in the banking world, if you add boundless data in understanding how your customers actually do the day-to-day business, how often they transact, what parties they transact with, etc., etc. If you had all of that information, what devices they're using, how often they log into their, let's say, web application or desktop application to undertake transactions with a bank, to take transactions or buy shares or whatever it may be. So imagine if you could have access to all of that, and add on to that the limitless analytics that you have available at your hands with your Python machine learning capabilities, etc., and then add on to that the automation capabilities. So you might be able to manipulate markets. As I forget the name of the individual who done it in the UK, but he was actually caught by the FBI and sent to the US. He was extradited to the US, and he was indicted in the US. But he was able to manipulate markets. He himself made millions from it. Ultimately, I think they did take that money back. Whether they were able to take all of it back, or whether it was fast enough to hide some of that, I don't know. But that's another area. If you think about just the social engineering frauds that take place nowadays, you've got elder type frauds that are taking place where if you had access to email addresses, which could be a type of boundless data, they could constantly be sending through automation emails to these individuals saying, "Oh, we're in trouble. Could you help us?" etc. And before you know it, you've got APP, authorized push payment type frauds taking place, where the elder generation, not understanding this, are actually authorizing their own bank account or their own bank to actually send payments to at that time an unknown criminal. So there's many examples of this, and they're using that technology, and so should we. I mean, from a banking perspective. So we're seeing banks actually, using big data capabilities to actually understand their customer base and take in as much data they can. And that could be transaction data, that could be device data, that could be customer data, the channel data, whether you log in through a web device or you ring in from a telephone line, etc., etc. And you've got all of this massive amounts of data. Historically, it was very difficult and very expensive holding that data and being able to analyze against that data. But with the new evolving technologies around machine learning and big data, Hadoop, etc., you're able to take a look at that data. There's a lot of data you've got to analyze, and then you want to do something with that data. So, being sent if they're sending payments to criminals, then we need to stop those payments before they leave the bank account, etc. And so they're just some of the examples, and we can go on and on and on and on. So from a KYC CDD perspective, Adam mentioned we have silos within banks where the same criminal can create an account in 3 parts of the bank, get mortgage in one, undertake share transactions in another, loan from another side of the bank, etc., etc. So, and before you know it, they're actually stealing from all parts of this bank only because they're siloed. So, being able to actually capture all of that data in a big data hub and then be able to run analytics is just part of the solution. We need to actually automate some of that capability to stop that behavior. And unfortunately, criminals are innovative, very innovative, and we need to be doing the same as well. So Adam, if you can move to the next slide. So an example, yep, thank you. So an example of this would be, okay, you've got these investigators sitting in their departments in all of these banks and financial organizations, running case management systems, having thrown many hundreds of alerts at them, and they need to decide which ones of these are false positives and which ones of these are actually true positives, which are real true crimes being taken place. Remember, we have to remember the real, I mean, Adam's kind of pointed out, but it's not just that we're stopping money changing hands. Where is this money coming from? It's actually coming from illegal means. It could be from modern day slavery. It could be from human trafficking. It could be from drug deals taking place. It can be from all sorts of illicit ideas. So, these agents need to understand that the guys, the investigators, and I think they do, they need to understand that they're not just following regulatory requirements, but actually they're stopping the money reaching the end end goals, which is Mr. and Mrs. Biggs, and ensuring it doesn't reach their pockets. So we need to actually provide them with tools that make their day-to-day life easier. So examples of this would be providing, automation finders, understanding where they're doing mundane work. If they're having to Google, 7 different Google searches to understand if someone's a possible money launderer or has some adverse media in news against them, then that's extremely mundane work. So if we're able to manage that, then that's a good way of automating and managing and automating that, then that's a good way of saving them time and actually giving them a bit of their life back, so that they can actually do what they're supposed to be doing, which is to do the investigatory work and try and find those criminals in amongst the weeds, which is ever so the case. The other side of that is, we want to ensure that we have reduced as many false positives, and that requires good analytics, but also we need to ensure that whilst the investigator is doing the work, we want to ensure that there's no bottlenecks within the solution. If you're finding that they're spending a lot of time in an unnecessary area, we need to ensure that we can clean those areas to ensure that they're working as efficiently as possible. And you want to be assigning the correct work to the right people as well. So if you've got extremely complex scenarios where there's money mules taking place, you want to ensure that you've got the right skilled individuals looking at the right level of alerts. If it's simple alerts, it can go to the latest trainee who's just done their training exercise last week, and they can do the simple AML fraudulent alerts and understand if it's fraud or no fraud, or if it's AML or need to send a SAR form to then NCA, they can do that. But the more complex scenarios need to be undertaken by those skilled investigators. So work allocation is extremely important as well. The other thing is, if we are able to automate the day-to-day mundane tasks, that's extremely important as well. Like, for example, if you're doing those 7 Google searches, or looking for related party information, or pulling back 180 days worth of transactional information for the 6 different accounts this individual party has, very boring work, right? So we want to be able to automate all of that and actually have that ready before they actually come in and log in for the day. So it should already be there in against the alert itself, but also allow them to have a toolkit so that they can create their own automation tasks. That's the final area. So that's quite important as well. Us as a vendor, Nice Actimize as a vendor, we see so much that we can help them with, but every individual financial institution or bank has their own scenarios that will be specific to them. So provide them the self-development toolkits to create these automations and add-ons is, I think, also very key to helping the case management process and automating that case management process. Adam, if you can move to the next slide, please. Okay, another area that I think, so we talked about case management automation, but also AI in action. Okay, so being able to have analytics with collective intelligence, and I'll come back to what collective intelligence means. So let's say, for example, we've already got access to all of this boundless data that's coming into the bank from all of those various channels and data streams, etc. One thing you want to do is ensure that is the data healthy? Is there? Am I missing anything? Is there elements that's not clean? Is it I'm expecting text, but it's coming in as numericals, etc., and vice versa. So you want to ensure that we monitor data health, but we also want to monitor the analytics performance as well. We've got various rules and models that are taking place that are running in the background. If they're taking too long, if they're not using the right data sets, etc., we want to ensure that they're extremely performant. The other side is identifying new typologies. There's new typologies coming out on virtually every week as criminals are being much more innovative. I talked about elder fraud, but there's also CEO type frauds, where someone pretends to be a CEO and says, you need to send that company £10,000 and you need to do it today. if your CEO asked you to do that, would you, question it? No, you wouldn't. I mean, if that's not the structure of your bank, you wouldn't. But if you're getting something from the immediate managers or even the manager's manager, then you're probably likely to do as they ask without asking any questions. So, being able to identify these new typologies and trends is extremely important. And the thing is, what we're seeing is that these trends follow country by country. If something's happening in the UK and it's being it's seen as being successful, then you might see it happen in France a little bit after. Soon after that, you might see it in Spain, Germany, in the Netherlands, etc. So, what Adam mentioned, having these borders, it doesn't help our cause. It doesn't stop the criminal, because they're able to actually see a fraud taking place and mimic that same fraud in a different country. So that's quite important, being able to see those trends, but also being able to monitor anomalies and watching degradation of your rules set and etc. is extremely important. Being able to identify those real outliers, those we're watching and understanding how a customer interacts with the bank, but there could be some real weird transactions just sitting out there which aren't spotted, and before you know it, you lost thousands or hundreds of thousands of pounds. So that's around monitoring of the analytics, but also you need to be constantly optimizing those analytics as well. We need to be creating new machine learning models as we find new fraud typology trends, etc. So we need to have those, but with our existing models need to be refreshed, with the input data from let's say our investigation. So if we're seeing new frauds taking place and that fraud is being detected as fraud, we need to ensure that our models are constantly refreshed, and we have to create new features. As the criminals are evolving, their ways of cheating us as a society are evolving. And remember that we're only capturing 1% of that total criminal activity that's going on out there. We've got a long way to go. So being able to create new features is extremely important. So not just us as a vendor, but allowing the bank to create these new features, so it's allowed them the capacity to create new models is extremely important. And then finally, validate. So validate, being able to ensure that we can test these new models and simulate these new models. Are we reducing the number of false positives? One of the biggest issues banks and financial institutions have is that they're throwing money at investigators to try and clear down alerts. And unfortunately, if there's a high percentage of false positives out there, then they're just essentially wasting their time. So we need to ensure that that our models are effective and be able to compare these with other solutions, etc. So that's another area. Then that's validation. But all of this, if you think about, if we were able to use the knowledge as a vendor across all of our banks. So if we see something that's taking place in the UK and we're able to stop that happening in France with the collective intelligence, then that's extremely important as well. So so peer benchmarking across each of the banks. If you have a capital markets customer in the UK and you've got another one in France, and you're seeing some sort of behavior taking place in the UK, you want to be able to stop that before it starts in France, etc. So if we want to have the industry level risk view and being able to have benchmarks across the whole block. That's it. So back to you, Adam.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So talk about collective intelligence. I think this is where we're probably seeing the industry going in the next 3 to 5 years, I guess, and even sooner. We're already doing some of this collective intelligence consortium approaches already. I think it's just going to develop, and I think what AI can deliver, or what machine learning can deliver in this new technology, I think it's just really going to take us to the next level in terms of fighting the criminals. And so further to what I said earlier about banks being siloed internally, there's even more siloing across multi-bank approach. So you can see here, so bank A, bank B, bank C, bank D. Do they talk to each other? Not a chance. But they don't talk to each other. there is some stuff set up to let them talk. So you've got Criminal Finances Act in the UK, which has a gateway to allow banks to talk to each other. But it's so clunky, I don't think anyone's ever used it. You then got the Fourth Money Laundering Directive, which has a gateway. I think Section 39 says that if there's a common transaction flow between the various banks, they can share information between themselves to understand the suspicion on the transaction. Do they use it? Very rarely. And actually, if Bank A and Bank B used it, very rarely would Bank A use it to Bank C. So, it's very disjointed in how it's used. So not only do we have to fix silos in a bank internally, but we also need to get rid of this whole siloed approach between the various banks, because, like I said, even internally, like the criminals do it internally, externally, it's even more prevalent that the criminals will go to multiple banks, set up accounts in multiple banks, knowing that the banks will never talk to each other. So that creates a problem for us fighting financial crime, because Bank A might say, I've had an alert here, and this might be a traditional transaction monitoring system. They might have an alert and say, this looks suspicious, I'm going to file a SAR. Bank B, for that same criminal behaviour, it might touch Bank B. They might look at it and go, I'm not suspicious, so won't file a SAR. Bank C might also look at it and go, I'm not suspicious, so won't file a SAR. So what you end up with is law enforcement, because they're relying on the banks to be their eyes and ears on the ground, they'll get a SAR from Bank A, but because Bank B and Bank C are using an old transaction monitoring system maybe, and they haven't looked at the data properly, or the data's not there to analyse, and they're not using new technologies, they haven't filed SAR. So all the law enforcement say is Bank A SAR, but they can't join the dots, and they can't see the puzzle that Bank B and Bank C could give them had they filed a SAR. And so this criminal gets away with his laundering activities. So something needs to change, and I think we are seeing that change. So we are seeing consortium approaches starting to occur, and they're, like I said, they're using technology to deliver those consortium approaches. And there's a scale of consortium. Left is easier to implement than the right, so it goes from left to right. But on the left-hand side, you've got information sharing. I don't know whether you're aware of it, but you've got public-private information sharing agendas going on. It started with Gimlet, and I'll come on to that in a bit, but you've got public-private information sharing happening, and it's been going on for about 5 years, and it's extremely successful, and it's been replicated around the globe. But I will come on to that in a bit. Next level you've got, which is what Muken's talked about, which is detection optimization. So this is where a financial institution using AI and machine learning will look at anomalies within their transaction behavior and their customer behavior. So they would take their KYC data. So what has the customer told you? They will integrate that with what the customer is actually doing. So the transaction data, is there a difference between what the customer's told you versus what they're doing? And actually, it will take even bigger data set and say, actually, well, what's this network doing? So who is this person associated to? What other feeds have we got? So any external data feeds coming in. So what does Experian say? What do the credit agency say on this individual? Have they got a company? What does the corporate register say on this individual? Is there adverse media on this individual? So you start bringing together lots of different data sources into one place and start analysing that bigger data set around that person, and use AI and artificial intelligence to look at the outliers. What doesn't look right? And you can start saying, this is normal for the customer, this isn't normal for the customer, and therefore we're going to start alerting on the abnormal behaviour for this customer. And the way I see it is models. So you've got typologies, and you've got models that look at typologies. That has to be there. That's always going to be there. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. And the regulators certainly won't say you can get rid of your rules. I can't see regulators saying get rid of your rules and just go pure AI. I think rules have to stay there. But the way I see it is rules are the baseline. So they are to catch the known behaviour. So this is the stuff that the FATF put out, the Wolfsburg Group put out, and say these are known criminal behaviours. You have to monitor for them. So the rules will look at the known behaviours, and it will alert on if there's a detection on a known behaviour. But AI will augment that and say, well, what is the unknown behaviour for this person? What is abnormal for this person? And let's start alerting on the unknown anomalies or this individual. And then you start getting machine learning coming out the other end. So, you know, when an investigation gets closed out, what was the scenario that made up that alert, and what was the decisioning that made up that disposal decision? And those models will start feeding back into the system, and over time it will start learning what is likely to be a SAR and what's likely to be closed out. And so you there start getting efficiencies within the system to say, well, actually, this behavior is pretty much quite normal for the customer, and actually the investigators have looked at this before and said this is normal, so they've closed out. So we're not going to, we don't think this is suspicious, so we're going to give it a low score, so it won't alert. But this behavior here was a bit anomalous. The investigators starred in it, so actually this is, you know, higher up the scale than it previously was. So you start getting machine learning and AI working together in harmony to really start looking at criminal behavior, and you start looking at suspicion rather than unusual behavior. But one thing about the consortium approach is you start sharing this data between other organizations. So there might be multiple organizations within this detection optimization consortium, and these organizations, you know, if they see a new anomaly coming up, which could be a new criminal typology, which Muken mentioned earlier, well, rather than one bank seeing it and then looking to protect themselves against it, they should really be shared with other banks, because then we can start getting ahead of the game and start getting ahead of criminal changes in behavior before the criminals can start getting a foothold within the banking sector. So this is where you can start sharing data across multiple banks around detection and around optimization and around new detection models, so that everyone can start looking at criminal behavior and start looking at new criminal behavior across the board. And this is, you know, this is starting to come to fruition now, and this is probably the last 12 18 months this has been in place, and it's starting to get real results within the industry. The far right is more POC, so there's lots of proof of concepts going on at the moment with the right hand side, and this is the full utility model. And the full utility model is basically where multiple banks say, you know what, Bank A, Bank B, Bank C, and Bank D, we've all got our own transaction monitoring solutions. We all look at transactions within our own organization, but we don't look across the board. And therefore, we're missing that bigger picture, which I mentioned earlier. So what the utility model is really looking at is saying, actually, can we all bring our data sets together into one place? And can we run detection on all that data set together in one place? So you've got one case management system, you've got 3 or 4 banks all sharing the data together into one place, and you're doing detection on that data as a collective. So you can start really getting that analytics around networks. You know, is a criminal operating in Bank A? Are they also operating in Bank B? Are they also operating in Bank C? Are they using aliases? Are they using mules? You know, and what you might start to see, or what I believe you will start to see, is start to see circulations of funds. You know, the criminals at the moment get away because we can't see the movement of funds between multiple banks, right? But if we start working together and doing consortium approach and start sharing that data and looking at anomalies using AI, the criminals have got nowhere to hide, because ultimately we will see the money going from A to B to C to D, back to A again, maybe, and maybe to Bank E. Well, the criminals therefore can't go to multiple organizations. But beyond that, what is also happening in industry is, and it's in the Netherlands, there's actually a joint KYC utility as well they're looking at. It's starting with corporates at the moment because that's the easier one to look at, but it's a decentralized blockchain system where they share KYC data on corporates within a blockchain. And what this allows organizations to do is to make sure that if they look to onboard a corporate, they can go into this blockchain and they can look at the data and make sure that the data is validated with another bank. And if there's discrepancy in the data sets, you know, for example, Bank B can then upload the discrepancy, and ultimately what will happen in time is you've got a holistic data set of this customer across multiple banks. It will save time in onboarding, because you won't have to get all the same documents all the time, because ultimately it's all up there in the cloud, in the blockchain. You can just utilize data that's already in the blockchain. You can validate data that the client's given you, and if there's discrepancies, you can challenge that discrepancy. And if you challenge it, all the banks within that blockchain who have the same customer will be able to see the discrepancies and challenge that as well. So you start making sure that you're onboarding the right customers and making sure that if there is challenges with that customer, you can spot that quite quickly, but not just as one bank, but as a collective. I think that becomes quite powerful. There's obviously quite some challenges with this: GDPR, data protection rules. So it's not all going to be plain sailing, but these POCs are out there. They're happening right now, and there's a lot of interest in this. So the UK are looking at this, especially what's happening in the Netherlands. The US are looking at what's happening in the Netherlands. I know Spain's looking at it, and I know places like Singapore, Hong Kong are also looking at this, going, okay, that's interesting. We want to see how this develops. And actually, in the Netherlands, get around GDPR, they're just changing the rules. So they've gone to legislature and said, we can't do this in current legislative environment. We want to change the legislation. And actually, the regulators have said, okay, we're listening. What do you want to do? So there's a real drive for this to happen. And I think, I don't think technology is the pure answer. Technology is not going to change the world, especially in the next 5 years. You still need the human beings to support it. But I think technology can spot anomalies that humans may not necessarily be able to catch. So you need to both work in harmony with each other. So humans and technology working together to catch criminals, but we need to do it as a collective across multiple organizations. And then I said I'd come back to this one, and I am. So the public-private partnerships. So this is where public-private partnerships have taken off around the globe. So you can see the first one was the Gimlet in the UK that started in 2015 as a trial, effectively as a pilot. The pilot lasted about 12 months, and it was actually so successful that other countries actually came to the UK to see what the UK were doing, and they took it away and started their own public-private partnership. A lot of these that you can see on the screen started around 2017, 2018, except Samlet. So South Africa started, I believe, in December 2019, so that's fairly new. And that's led by the Financial Intelligence Unit, but it's got a number of banks in South Africa sharing data and sharing intelligence and working as a collective. And the most recent one that came out was Samlet in Sweden. It's got the same name as the South African one, but it's a Swedish Samlet. And that started in May this year. So that's very, very fresh. So there's no results from that yet, but there's other countries also looking at this as well. So I think over the next couple of years, we will see more public-private partnerships happening. And this is the first stage towards that full utility model. And the UK Gimlet's been so successful. They've got tens of millions of pounds seized. They've arrested lots of people. They've created new investigations as a result of this. So there's stuff and they found accounts that they never knew about. So law enforcement have found accounts that they never knew about by using the Gimlet model, which is banks come together with law enforcement and they share information, they share data, and it works. And I think the proof is in the pudding, and all these other countries have taken these on. So clearly there's some merit in what's going on. And I think in terms of industry view, I had a webinar I presented on a few weeks back, and to the audience in the webinar, I said to them, well, here's a survey. Do you think the consortium model, and before this, we talked around the whole AI and machine learning and humans and technology working in harmony, and said, do you think the consortium approach is the way forward to fight financial crime? I don't think you'd be surprised to see that nearly 65% said it would be a substantial part of forming a new financial crime strategy to fight financial crime. No one, I'm glad to hear, said it'd have limited or no effect. I'm not sure what they've done. I'm not sure why they would have said that, but luckily no one said that. So, and then the next part was what's the biggest challenge to achieving this? And actually, surprisingly, it wasn't technology that came up. So people believe that the technology is there in its current form, with things like machine learning, AI, and also that platform basis to be able to support it. The biggest challenge, people said, was legislation not allowing consortium to happen. And I think this goes back to my point around GDPR, data protection rules, and not enough clarity or guidance from regulators to say, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and this is what you should do. So I think there's a mix there, but legislation's clearly an issue, and there's clearly not enough guidance or direction from legislators or regulators as well. But I just thought this was really interesting to show show this and what the audience within that other webinar thought of consortium. What does the future hold beyond the next 5 years? You know, are we looking sort of 10, 15, 20 years time now? You know, what does AI machine learning technology look like in fighting criminals? And rather than me talk about this, I will hand it back over to Muken, who can cover this part.
Yeah, so here, if we're talking about historically, I'm going to take the example of cars, machine-assisted humans. So if you look back in the 70s, 80s, it was mainly the car, and it was just a machine, but there was no robotics, there was no automation. But slowly over the years, you had cruise control come in, power-assisted steering. Etc., etc. Mirrors that fold back or fold down when you're reversing, etc. So, that was what they used to do. And over the years, over the decades, it's slowly changing, and it's changing nowadays. With the new Tesla cars, you got near enough a machine that just requires you to say, where do you want to go, and it will drive you there. Right. Obviously, there's still a lot of legislation that needs to be done to authorize that, especially in Europe, etc. But the technology is nearly there. I wouldn't say it's quite there, 100% there, but it's nearly there. But likewise, from a fraud AML compliance perspective, we want to be able to help the investigators, help them find those needles in the haystack to ensure that the fraud or AML or the compliance alerts are and these criminals are captured. And what you want to be doing is allowing the machine to do all of the hard work, but you still, as the human, still decides whether this is right or wrong, in the sense of have we captured have we found a criminal activity here or not. So still requires a human to actually make that final decision. So I think we're still a little bit away from there, but not that far away. I think we've made quite a huge paradigm shift in terms of history. So just coming into the final set of slides before we can go into questions. So Adam, if you move to the next slide. So if we're just thinking out of the box, if you're a current criminal, imagine if you had that Anchor chat available to you. It's like Genius as a criminal service. I need to clean £10 billion worth. Who can do that for me? You can just send that chat out there and someone will say, I'll do that for you. Or fix it so I can make money from this bond, from a surveillance point of view. You could send that out to some sort of chat robot or whatever, and you've got someone else wanting to do that. Get the bank to give me a giant mortgage that I won't pay. Come on, sort it out. Still some pocket money for me. Well, criminals need to start somewhere, and I'm sure they weren't totally innocent when they were children. So, stealing some pocket money is probably where they started from. So, Adam, if you move to the next slide, the very last slide. From our point of view, let's provide a counter to that. Genius as a service. Think of all the ways to launder and try and stop it. Be imaginative as possible, and then let's find ways to actually we can find them in the first instance, and then be able to stop them. Don't let anyone manipulate the market. Look for those anomalies where they're able to manipulate the market, and before you know they've stolen millions from the market, and you and me have lost out. Only do business with trustworthy people. That's the KYC side. So ensuring you have a very effective KYC process. The example that Adam said was around the gymlets. Being able to share that information with using technologies that are available to us. So that's another way. Protecting all of my customers from fraud. We have a wide range of customers from youngsters, teenagers, all the way to massive corporates. Being able to protect all of those different types or segments of people and companies and organizations is extremely important. And this list can go on and on. We can think about it as just as much as that innovative criminal is thinking about it. We should be thinking about all of these inventive ways to stop fraud and stop laundering and stop allowing them to manipulate markets, etc. So that's it. It comes back to our we have robotic criminals and vice versa, and it's a match against the robotic bank. So that ends our presentation for now.
Thanks for the presentation. I think and do a lot of justice to that. I will encourage everyone to feel free to send some questions in the chat box. I think that is the very interactive session whereby we get to feel free to ask our panel or our presenters a lot of information as regards your KYC process and how you could automate it. But if you're bold enough to unmute your mic and ask a question, feel free. But let me kick this off. There are a couple of questions. Maybe Adam could look at the chat. A couple of questions also in the chat also. But let me kick this off by asking a question to you guys. The process of doing KYC or know your customers it's a very manual process. As far as I know, I work in a few banks, and the process is so manual whereby you have to physically go into different systems here and there and to begin to analyze data. You even have to go Google if you want to analyze who are the ultimate beneficiaries owners. It's a very, very manual process. How does AI or robotics enhance this process to make it a little bit more automated?
So I can take that one. So what we're seeing and what's happening in industry, especially in the technology space, is what we mentioned earlier is the integration. So it's that bringing together of all the data, and Muken mentioned it earlier. And what we're seeing and what's happening is automation is allowing that data to be brought into one place. So, for example, all the manual processing you have to do for KYC onboarding, especially if it's corporate, who is the UBO? Have I validated the UBO data? Have I done an adverse media check? Have I done, a PEP check? Have I done a sanctions check? Except, the list goes on and on. But what we can do now is you've got one case platform, and you have a tool that goes out to all the various different systems externally at a click of a button. So you can have, Shell, for example, as a corporate. Maybe not a good example, but you've got Shell as a corporate. Shell as a corporate goes into the system, and at the click of a button, or even automated before it even comes to that processing stage, it reaches out to all the different data sources. The UBO list, maybe Dun & Bradstreet or something. Adverse media list, maybe Google as well. Set PEPs and sanctions list, and it brings all the data back into one place. So all the analyst has to do is to open up the onboarding case, and all the data is there ready for them. And what's going to happen, I guess, in the next sort of 6 to 9 months, maybe even a year, in terms of technology capabilities, is it will start always then doing that always on monitoring. So not only have you gathered all the data automatically, but you can start then saying, well, actually, if there's any changes to that data, I want to know about it. So you can start saying, right, well, the UBO list has changed, or actually there's a new UBO. Let's do a reassessment of this data. So yeah, Muken, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, so there's that's, I mean, what Adam's mentioned is the data aggregation aspect of it. So, if there's any areas where we can aggregate the data and provide that data in a single stream, that we use, so, reaching out Dun & Bradstreet and, the BVDs and Googles of the world, et cetera, right? So that's one way. Another way that I've seen, that I've worked with 2 banks, one in South Africa and one in the UK, where we used automation capabilities. I think Kamala, you asked about UiPath, etc. So we have our own automation, which is close to our solution itself from KYC and transaction monitoring perspective. But typically the banks have their own automation, enterprise automation capabilities. So if we were able to provide the hooks from our side to enable them to create the automation into the core banking systems, and that makes the whole automation a lot easier. And my what I learned from that exercise, we did quite a few of these removal of those mundane tasks. So we had I gave the example, they were doing 7 Google searches, they were doing related parties, they were pulling back 180 days worth of transaction data, right? And that was done by various means, swivel chair, email, etc. Literally sitting there and capturing the screen and copy pasting into a Word document. They were spending half an hour, 40 minutes doing that every day for every single alert that they worked on. No wonder some of these banks have 7,000 a backlog of 7,000 to 12,000 alerts. It's an extremely laborious process and time-consuming process. So if we're able to do it by data aggregation, that's one way. Another way is automating those. But in those automations as discrete as possible. Don't make it too big. If you make the automation too big, you're going to fail. If you do discrete elements, you're more likely to succeed.
Hello. Thank you, Mark. This is Joey. I actually was the one to ask the question respect to UiPath. I actually have done a couple of certification with UiPath, developers level, being the part of implementation. And I see I actually work with the Studio X and the orchestrator. But the problem is that I trying to some of the solutions I've actually been working on, that had to do with intelligent bots. I realized that automation with respect combating financial crime, as you say, that you have aggregated data and, this thing is pulled from one source, and some people, due to the processes already that they have in the system, you may have to reach out to a third party to do screening. You may have to, gather documentation or existing documentation in the repository to analyze ownership structures and stuff. However, I do know that you do have situations where you may have exceptions, and the exceptions may have to have that human intervention, where you may have to make that judgment. Probably, maybe you're trying to, analyze a complex structure, ownership structure, that you see some anomalies in EMA area, in United Arab Emirates, and some of them, you have those UBOs that don't want to declare some of their identities, and you may have to step in, and there'll be some exceptions, and probably top level will now do some waiver, and probably do some motivational writings to exempt them. How do you think the traditional analysts or people like most of us that are just trying to evolve into the AI robotics world would actually tap into these new opportunities? Because as you may know, we all know already that, like you just said, it could be in the next 9-12 months, we may actually not have any jobs anymore. And so how do we, evolve and upskill? Where do you think we can fit in? Because I know some people may be able to be, have some level 1 access to, press some of these buttons. How do we evolve and key in and be able to sustain our career and take it to the next level in the digital world? Thank you.
That's a long question.
Yeah, let me start with that, and maybe Adam, you can add in afterwards. So, from a it kind of comes back to my third slide from the end, which said human-assisted machines, right? There's always going to be exceptions, right? And the last thing I said was, try and keep your automations discrete. Don't make them too big, right? If you can do discrete bits of automation, go and pull back this and go and do a Google search, or go and get the historic transactional data. They're discrete elements of automations, right? Once you've got all of those in a box and they're working very well, you're always still going to have exceptions, right? There's got to be a lot of exceptions, error handling, exception handling capabilities done within the automation itself, right? That's got to be built in, unfortunately. So, and that's why these automation projects can be quite big. And that's why I say keep them small as possible. And that the ones that are small as possible will succeed. And the thing is, the human-assisted machines piece of what I mentioned is that, if the machine is doing all the work for you, you're always going to have that scenario where there's a complex situation, or the entity doesn't want to provide data or whatever it is, right? That analyst will always need to get involved, and in those cases you're going to have those exceptions. Then unfortunately you're going to have to write them into your automation script to allow those exceptions to take place. The second part, where you can help yourselves is essentially, there's, from an AI perspective, there's a lot of free AI courses available around Python, coding, etc. And I've done it myself. I took part in 10 weeks of Python coding. I wasn't very good at it. I don't have a computer science degree behind myself, but I learned the basics and understood what it all meant. People who have the computer science background, who are doing these sort of courses, I know you guys will excel, because I don't have that, so it's difficult for me to understand it. So that's another way. So you've got Python related courses. There's many courses that are available actually at the moment that would help. Anything else to add, Adam?
Yeah, I think I'll echo what you said, Muken. So I don't think technology is not there yet where it's going to replace all the humans. So we are not there yet, and in my opinion, I think we're a long way away from all humans being replaced by intelligent robots. So into robots, I think where they're smarter than humans, it is several years away, if not 20, 30 years away, sort of thing, where machines excel humans. And it goes back to another point I made, that the technology available today supports humans to do their job better. So technology is a tool in the toolbox to help humans do a better job more efficiently and get better outcomes. That's my view. We're far away from the central computer onboard this person, get all the data and make a decision for us. We're not there, and we're not going to be there for a long time. So it's a tool to help you get all the data. It's the tool to help reduce errors. So it'll help reduce manual errors. So having to input different data sources into different places all the time. If for an onboarding solution, you might have to put the same data in several times in different places. It stops those manual errors. But ultimately, a human still has to make a decision. A human still has to sign off on onboarding. A human still has to make a decision whether an activity is suspicious or not. A human still has to go to the NCA with a star. All these things, a computer just is not capable of doing. This intelligent thinking, this intelligent decision making, and the rationale and subjectiveness, it cannot do. So I don't think I'd worry about your job. I think just make sure you embrace the technology and just be good at your job. If you can do those two things, I think humans still have a place in the workplace.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. And a couple of questions in the chat. So I think maybe it might be a good idea to look at those. And if we can have some of the feedback, maybe 1 or 2 responses, and maybe as brief as we can, because the questions are really piling up. I'm sure where to start now. As a question from John. John says, from a presenter's perspective, is KYC categorized as an AML and financial requirement or an operational requirement?
So if I answer the question, is KYC considered an AML requirement?
AML and financial requirement or an operational requirement?
So KYC, in my opinion, is an AML requirement ultimately. So if you look at the regulations, so you've got the money laundering directives from Europe, you've got the regulations with the FCA. KYC is part of the process of understanding your customer. Within the KYC, you have enhanced due diligence and you have standard due diligence, where you have to understand, sources of wealth. Sometimes you might have to understand what the nature of the business is, what you expect their activity to be, and make sure that ultimately the person you're taking on in the organisation is who they say they are. So you don't want to take on John Smith and find out it's Teresa Smith who lives at a completely different address, because there's a risk to you that you're facilitating potentially money laundering. So ultimately, yeah, absolutely, it's an AML requirement, and it's written in regulations.
Okay. It's a question from Ifai DPA. He's saying AI is set to rely on machines, while CI relies on humans. It has also been said that AI could be biased and prejudiced, as it could be flawed, as those who build them. How then can AI be kept ethical? How does CI keeps the AI ethical? CI means, if you want to tell us what CI means?
So my answer to that question is absolutely, it can be biased, and if you don't look at the system, it can then build that bias into its results and outcomes. And I think you've seen that I've seen things like Google, built robots, they managed to create their own language because it was kept unchecked. So I think if organizations are going to start implementing AI, machine learning, or other technologies that can start learning and understanding anomalies, there has to be a governance process in place to manage it. Just like you would with an investigator. If an investigator does an investigation and comes with an outcome, you have to have a governance process in place to monitor that investigator to make sure that they've come up with the correct outcome, they've gone through the right procedures. That's no different for AI. You still have to have a governance process in place to make sure that AI is giving you the right outcomes. If it's not, you then have to tweak the AI to make sure that it stays on track.
Okay. So the question of the chat, it says, how do you add exceptions since not it's a repetitive task is automated and a queue in an orchestrator? I'm not sure they get any question. It says, what automation company solutions is widely used? It talks about UPath and Blueprint. I think it's more technical. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Muken,
yeah, I kind of addressed that in my when I was mentioning about exceptions. If Kamala, do you have it? Did you understand that? Is this an additional question?
It's a question that came up on the chat, just reading through.
Yeah, I think I answered that. It's really about building an exception in the automation that you're creating. If you don't allow to build that exceptions, because it will happen, whether it's error handling or whether it's actual exceptions from a business perspective handling. If you don't build that into the automation, then ultimately your automation will fail. So you have to do that, unfortunately.
Okay. A question from Kieran. He's saying, I've been studying foundations and introduction online courses on machine learning. How much value do you see these courses, UiPath, help to increase my chances of building a career in this industry? I have a traditional legal background and ongoing KYC experience at work, but not robotics process or automation. Would you recommend undertaking more computer science courses at home or get into the sector?
My view is, if you've got a legal background and you understand the KYC process, if you're trying to learn the automation capabilities, and whether that's from an AI perspective or from a automation perspective, I think it's a real plus, right? But because you have data scientists or automation experts who don't really understand the industry and don't understand what the KYC process actually means and what it needs to do. So if you have both sides of that, if you understand it from a legal perspective and understand what regulatory requirements are asking from you, and then you're able to build that it doesn't matter what courses you do, if they're free online courses or college courses or whatever it is. I think the two combined is exceptionally useful, and there's very few people out there who have that.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. There's a question from Mary. He's saying, I was wondering if the parameters used in setting up an AI-based transaction monitoring system will be in a layman's language for an auditor with no coding or IT experience to review or opine on its relevance or reasonability. Good one.
I can do that. Yeah. So I think, as kind of Adam mentioned, that there needs to be governance. The more clever the AI is getting, the machine learning models are getting, et cetera, there needs to be appropriate governance reports to be able to explain to the regulator exactly why you've done what you've done, why you've chosen this model over another model. So the governance reports that we have, the model governance reports that you need, with the need to explain them in layman's language, in real layman's language, why that's been done, what benefits it does, if you tweaked it in a certain way, what benefits it provides, etc. Adam, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess there's two types of AI. So there's explainable AI and there's unexplainable AI. Explainable AI, there's effectively a rules surrounding it, so it's controlled. Explainable is exactly that. It creates explainability. So although it's AI and it's let to do its own thing, there's explainability around what it's doing and why it's doing what it's doing. And so you can go to a regulator and say, it's AI, but here's the explainability and here's the rules and how it's working. In layman's terms, I'm not sure you can explain it in layman's terms. I'm not sure, with me with an operations background, looking at the script saying, I don't think I'd have a clue. But organisations would have people within them to say this is what it means, and I believe the FCA have got techies in there now who are in place who can say this is what it means. I think the FCA are starting to get more with explainable AI. There's unexplainable AI, which is basically coding, which goes back to an earlier point, that it's just left to run and it learns itself. I think the FCA are less comfortable with that. They're starting to move their comfort level, but at the moment, I think if you can't explain it, the FCA probably won't be too happy with it at the moment. But I think the next year, 2 years, I think that might change if it does good things.
There's a question from Chuma. He's saying, with every technological advancement, what new jobs do you think will be created in the next decade in the fintech sector?
So I'll take this one first, and Muken's probably got an opinion on this as well. So absolutely, it's going to be data scientists. Is going to be key on this. And actually, I understand there's actually a glut of data scientists globally. Organizations can't get enough data scientists because there isn't enough people with the right skill set to code, do R&D, and to do development, especially within the AI machine learning space. So, they're getting some top dollar at the moment for data scientists globally. And like I said, people can't employ enough of them. I also think a bit of a side to that is people who understand technology who can explain it back to industry. So that's part of the reason why I came into this sector, because I've got an operational background, and I think if you can understand what technology is capable of doing, where it can go, and how it can be utilized in an operations environment, I think you can become quite powerful. So I think people who can have that operational knowledge but see both sides of the equation from a technology perspective, I think that is going to be where people are looking from an employment perspective.
Just to add.
I totally agree with that. I mean, it comes back to the last point I made, which was, if you got a legal, it was from a KYC perspective. If you have a legal background and you're learning automation capabilities, then you'll be seen as being much more attractive to a bank because you already understand what KYC means, and you'll then be able to automate the processes. So I think it's key having both that regulatory banking knowledge, but the practical operational knowledge. And then you can, if you add to that, if we want to be a data scientist, I know there is a glut of data scientists out there. That's why they're being paid a load at the moment. But there's, other areas as well, business analysts, etc., the automation experts, etc. There's a lot of areas where you can excel. That's going to be prone in the next 10 years.
As a matter of fact, I saw a role on LinkedIn just this week. They were looking for someone, an infrastructure developer, to build a program for a bank to run the program for one of their finance supply chain. And if I tell you how much you're paying for the role, you will be aghast. It was paid for $197,000 per annum.
Yep,
That's about $200,000. So that's just crazy.
It's crazy money. But the other area, actually, I've just remembered now, a lot of banks are actually moving, when you're talking infrastructure, they're moving from very expensive on-premise type data center type environments where they own their own data centers and their own hardware, etc. And we're seeing a much more cloud-based move. So, that's another area where I think there's going to be a huge expansion. And you've seen that with Amazon. And you've seen, Google Cloud, and you've seen Microsoft Azure follow suite, because Amazon have done really, really well off the back of that, right? They've done most of their growth through the Amazon Web Services. So I think they're areas that, if you guys want to focus on as well, are going to be key. And there are many wide roles. You could be, a technology specialist. You could be infrastructure specialist. You could be anything there. So I think they're that role is going to expand massively in the next 10 years.
Another question is, like I mentioned in the previous, the roles for analyzing KYCs and TDDs is very manual, and a lot of smaller banks operate in a system whereby the solutions is so manual. If we want to employ your services or to touch base with you guys and Actimize, what would you do to enhance, to come in and to transform our solution? Give us some guidance, some pointers if we want to touch base with you, and we invite you over to look into our processes and see how we could enhance it further. What advice, how would you come in?
So I can cover that, and others can pick up on that if they need to. So what we do is we're very outcomes based. So what we wouldn't do is come in and say, oh, you need KYC, here's a KYC solution. That's not, it's not productive for anyone. It's not productive for us. It's not productive for you. So what we do is really understand what is it you're doing at the moment, what is it you're trying to achieve, and what is the timelines you're trying to achieve that with. What I mean by that is, what you're doing at the moment is, is it manual? How many people are you trying to onboard? How long is it taking you? So it's really trying to get into the weeds in terms of the details about what's going on at the moment. And in terms of the outcomes, in the next 1-2 years, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to save costs? Are you trying to save, staffing? Are you trying to save time? Are you trying to be more efficient, etc.? So we really get to understand your business, understand what your achievements are, what your outcomes are. Once we understand that, we can then come to you and say, this is what we think you should be doing from a technology perspective, and this is the benefits you can achieve based on what you've told us. So, it's very much a partnership approach that we take, and we try and work alongside the organisation to understand them, to give the best possible service and the best possible solution to them. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that.
I think you got it.
Good. Another question. We've been having a series of topics on emerging technology. We looked into blockchain. We also looked into AI, which is what we're looking at today. You might be some persons who have never heard of it before and say, what's AI? We're talking about AI for a while, artificial intelligence, but what does it really mean? What does it really do? Now, let's look at not from a banking perspective, but generally, how do you think it will transform the world? I've seen some adverts whereby using AI even to help with cataracts, with some illnesses and all that. But if you compare the other emerging technology, what do you think is actually up there and why? Maybe break down AI a little bit more to a more layman's language, and how you think it will transform the world, so to speak.
Okay. Muken, to take this one first?
Yeah, it's quite a tough question. In terms of AI, I mean, we're seeing, yeah, we're seeing. I mean, I'll give you an example of what we're doing within the organisation. So, Adam mentioned, we're being able to predictive SARs. Predicting them before the analyst has actually looked at them. So we observing how the individual is acting, how they perform, what sort of transactions they interact with, and who they interact with, etc., etc. So obviously we're looking for the unusual behavior and suspicious transactions, but learning off the back of those, right? So we're seeing, okay, this type of activity ended up being a SAR, so okay, let's put that back in the learning process. So we feed that information back into the learning process within machine learning itself, and then within artificial intelligence we'd be using that information. So as if we see that again, if that similar scenario takes place again, we're able to say, actually, this is likely to become a SAR because this happened before, and that was a SAR before. And if you translate into the fraud world, it's kind of similar as well. So if for example, you see a couple of transactions that are taking place in a particular way, and then they end up being fraudulent, then you can feed that information back into the machine learning AI engine, which would then understand that this was a fraud scenario. So if anything similar to that happens again, it'll identify that as being possibly a fraud and alert you as that transaction being suspicious. Just that.
And I think going sort of to the sort of real world, if you like, so outside of financial crime, it's used. I think it's used already at the moment. So if anyone's got a Virgin box or a Sky box, there's an option there, isn't it? It says, we think you like these programs, we think you like this. Well, that's machine learning. It learns what you're watching on TV, and it rates back saying, actually, we think you might like this program, or you might like to watch this, or you might like to see, this film. And I think Netflix does the same sort of thing. That is AI, because it learns your behavior, it learns what you're doing, and it's intelligent to say, actually, I think you might like this or this or this. I think even moving forward, I think AI will start making our lives better, so we can start developing things quicker. So streamlined aeroplanes, for example. What's the most streamlined way to fly through the air with saving costs in terms of fuel? Well, it can look at that sort of thing. So I think it will start changing the world. And I think once we get to the point where it's as intelligent as humans, you can start asking it questions and say, how do we solve global warming? And it could come up with a response very, very quickly, because it's got the mind of probably 100 humans, for example. It's as clever as Einstein, like we showed in the presentation. So I think that's a long way off, but I think that's where AI can go. But it happens today. The machine learning part is what happens probably more so than we probably realise.
Yeah, that's a good one. There was something that happened a couple of weeks ago. We're just looking at we're looking for a friend to rent a property. So my missus was looking at the property prices and for certain property, and she settled for one, and that was just hers. So all of a sudden, within the same day, I was just checking my emails. I got the pop-up as well on adverts and showing me that same house for sale. Meanwhile, her email and my email is entirely different, but yet it kind of showed me exactly what my missus was looking at. And I just found that really fascinating. And I want to think that there's some AI going on somewhere at the background, because how does it link her to me? That was just my emails were different. How was that possible?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a question there on the chat. Okay, we'll still be banding up now. In the medical field, I used AI to read MRI scans for strokes. So AI will be assisting doctors in diagnosis. I'm intrigued and worried at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife works in the pharmaceutical industry, and she did some AI work with Amazon, and some of the use cases, I forget them now, but some of the use cases were just mind-boggling. It was like, my God, they're thinking about doing that. Like look at your face, look at and find some ailments. I mean, wow, it's just next level. So yeah, really interesting.
Just the last question: do you think AI would be a threat to our jobs in the nearest future, or do you think in a way it just complements it and we'll still carry on the way we are?
Complements it. We're way away from having true AI running by itself. So as Adam mentioned, we're talking 30 years away before automation or AI takes over. And I'm not even sure if that's 30 years away is right, but yeah, it's far away yet.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're not at iRobot yet.
All right. Do you guys want to round up? You want to say anything for today?
No, I've got nothing else. Thank you very much.
Maybe how do people contact you? Do you want to put some information? You have it on the slide in case someone wants to reach out to you guys, for instance. Or I'm happy to.
So we haven't got any. Unfortunately, we've got no slides. Mike, I don't know if you want to take this and they can reach out to you.
Yeah, I'll just jump in quickly. Firstly, I'll say thank you all very much for joining the conversation so actively. In fact, let me even round out a little bit. I'm obviously the commercial side of our organization. We have very few conversations with banks actually talking about replacing people with AI. What we're trying to do frequently is make the five guys that are trying to do something on a huge scale and getting a tiny bit done, be able to do all of it with only hiring another 10 rather than hiring 1,000 guys.
Oh, sorry about that.
And so really what we want to do is a lot of what Adam was talking about. It's a partnership level. So I'm very happy for anyone.
Did we lose Mike?
No, Mike, you're muted.
Sorry about. I'll try to unmute him. You can unmute yourself. Sorry, I was trying to unmute you, but it's been. Can you unmute yourself? I was trying to do that here.
Yes, I'm unmuted again.
Okay.
So my
We can hear
email
you.
I'm putting into the chat right now is michael9@niceactimize.com. So firstly, I'm very happy to speak with anyone who is on this call. And if you've got some follow-up questions, I can try to answer them myself. But as you can see, I always bring far more intelligent and good-looking guys than I am to come and answer these questions for you. So I can easily liaise with the right people to answer your questions. And if you've got particular interest in engaging with our company, just as Adam said, we have a very open partnership approach. So I literally am the sales guy, and the last thing I'm going to do is try to roll up and sell you something quickly. I want to understand exactly how your organization works, what you're trying to do, and figure out with you if there's a way we can help, and if there is, what's a commercially viable way to make that happen. And I think that's always the right way to do business with people.
All right, thanks so much, your team. And just before we go, this has been hosted by Like Minds. We are an African professional network in the City of London. Most of us are in the financial sector, and we came together to provide a supporting network for ourselves through manpower development, job placement, networking, and we've been around for a while, and we've been having all these webinars just to empower and to develop ourselves even further. I've sent on the group chat our contact details. We are also on LinkedIn. Feel free to send us an invite to be part of a group, and feel free to check out our website and drop us an email. likeminds88@gmail.com if you want to have access to the presentation, the slides for today. I'm happy to send that to you, but feel free to send us an invite, an email, and so we can connect with you even more. Thank you, everyone. Thanks again to Adam, to Mike, to Muken as well for taking on this session. And thanks everyone today. And before you go, you might as well just put on your screen. Let's see your lovely face and say hello before you go, if that's okay with you. Come on, some of you. This is not so we can see your lovely faces. Oh, I see some bold faces now. I'll have put on the cameras. Let's say hello before we go. That'll be a good one. Now, who is still there? Hello, everyone.
Hiya.
You can
Hi.
talk as much as you want now before you go.
Hello.
Come on, Muken.
Come on, guys. Come on, Kieran. Let's see your face. Wale, let's see your face. Yo, let's see your face. Mike, let's see your face. Come on, guys. Let's be bold and let's see our faces. And let me do a group picture.
Thanks. That was a good presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
for the
very much.
presentation.
Yeah.
You're totally welcome. You're totally welcome, guys.
All
All right, thanks,
a follow-up
guys.
session would be really good as well, like on the next topic or anything you guys want to represent from Nice Actimize. So it's good how it links with the banking sector.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, if you've got any ideas how you'd want us to follow up, or if you've got anything you want us to talk about, let us know. Reach out to Mike or John.
Yeah.
We're more than happy to come back and give you something else if there's anything that interests you. So yeah, more than welcome. We'll have to come back again.
Well, one thing to know is that Nice Actimize, they run webinars very, very regularly. I think almost bi-weekly they run the webinar. So if you want to have access, you can touch base with Mike. He'll add you to the distribution list, and you could have access to the several webinars which they organize. But in this watch this space, we want to have another webinar hoping next 2 weeks on robotics. We're going to be looking at robotics and some other good things that are going on in that AI space also in a couple of weeks. So just watch this space. We might move, if we go back to work, we might move it to Saturday, but let's see how we get on, because some companies are beginning to go back to work. And so anyway, have a good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. All right. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.